Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, John.
Well, that was an awesome pre-show. For those of you who got to see it, I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And Tony, what was your favorite part?
Oh, without doubt, it was the Corey band. I was brought up in Yorkshire, and brass bands were the name there. And so that was just a fantastic way to wake everybody up for the morning.
I could have guessed. That would be my guess in your favorite part. Well, people, good morning and welcome to the first ever District 6330 virtual conference. Coming to you live from our studio in Rotary Hall in Southampton. We want to give a special welcome to our friends in Michigan who are able to join us virtually, which would have now been impossible in a real conference. We have guests. We are live from our studio. We have guests and presenters who are live from their home. And we have our registrants, over 300 of you from 11 different countries, comfy at home, looking after your own washroom and coffee break needs. It's been an awesome adventure getting here, and we're so excited to share it with you. We have just a few more items to begin, to straighten out before we begin. So, Tony, I can't see the registrants. I know they're here, but I don't see any. What's up with that?
Well, this is a Zoom webinar, John. It's not a Zoom meeting. So we can't see them, and they can't see. They can see us, but they can chat with us. And we've seen loads of chats from all around the world this morning. And so that's the way to do it. And if the people around the world have got a question, just put it in the Q&A box. And we will try and get back to them, hopefully this morning, and if not, later in the week, we'll get back to you with it. So any questions, put it in the Q&A box.
That's awesome, Tony. And I also hear we're on Facebook.
Yes, we've all streaming the show to all our friends through Facebook Live. There's a slight 10-second delay from the Zoom call, but it's great.
Well, sounds like we've looked after all the details, Tony, and we're ready to go live to our virtual conference. Tony, ring the bell.
No Rotary conference would be right without the bell for the opening ceremony. And that's probably our only nod to the tradition, because when we thought about doing this, we thought, how do you actually replicate a conference in a virtual environment? And so we had the idea of converting it into the morning show. And here we are. And that wasn't as easy as we might have thought, John, was it?
It certainly wasn't, Tony. Nobody 2 years ago when we started this journey had any idea that with 3 months to go, our planning was done and it was time to begin anew.
Yeah, my biggest disappointment though is all our club members who we'd all got geared up and we'd got tasks for them all to do over the weekend can't really participate. So and with all the issues about gathering in large numbers, there's only 5 was allowed in a room at the time, and it's now 10. It was really a challenge to even put this together. So that's my disappointment that they couldn't participate at the weekend and meet all the friends from all around the district. But this is the best we can do, and we're thrilled there are over 300 registrants online today.
It is so, Tony. It was a challenge. 2.5 days to a little over 3 hours. We knew it could be done. We had no idea how to do it, but I think we've figured it out.
Yeah, and I'd also like to give a big shout out to all our sponsors. We offered them their funds back because it wasn't the conference they envisaged, but many of them said, no, we'll leave the money with you because we're great believers in what Rotary does and what it stands for. So for all those people, I thank you, everyone. And if we have any surplus over from this conference, we've agreed with them that will be shared between Rotary and COVID-19 response activities.
That's awesome, Tony. Let's move on to our conference with our introduction of our first presenter.
We're having guests on our show, John. And our first guest this morning is Chris Cummings. And he's a renowned leadership guru and consultant. And I saw him a few years back on a TED Talk, which we'd used for a training session. And I thought one day he would make a great speaker at our conference. But he's now a guest on our show. So I contacted him a couple of years back and he said, yes, he'd do it, but he wanted to speak for 2 hours and be the first person as the first keynote speaker. And he wanted to interview Rotarians so he better understood our organization. Well, we managed 2 of those for Chris out of the 3. And we're sorry you only have 40 minutes.
Right.
But Chris has a new book. Like all good consultants, he's got a new book coming out entitled The Human Side of Business. And we're going to have a sneak peek at what is in his book today as he talks to us about the human side of service. So a big, warm Zoom welcome for our first guest this morning, Chris Cummings, live from his studio in Toronto. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, first question I have. Can you hear me, Tony?
Chris.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yay, awesome. Let me start by saying that this is a very unique experience, I think, for pretty much all of us. And I've been giving speeches now for 15 years full-time at conferences and national sales meetings. My core business is sort of opening or closing big multi-day events for companies. And every single time I get a call from a Rotarian that says we're doing a thing, I pretty much say, you don't have to tell me anymore, we're good, let's do this thing. My first introduction to Rotary was at Camp Enterprise, and I think I spoke at one particular Camp Enterprise for 8 years in a row or so. And while not being a Rotarian myself, I noticed that myself and Rotary, we have a lot of things in common. That 4-way test is one of the best ways to run one's life. And I just want to say to Tony and to the organizing committee and everyone who took the time for today, thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for being here. And thank you for being open to a new concept of having a conference from your house. Now, there was a Harvard psychology professor in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. If you've studied psychology, you might recognize this name. This dude was William James. And some would argue he's one of the fathers of modern psychology. So William James said in his earlier text, he said, the greatest discovery we've made in my lifetime, which is his lifetime, in the study of human psychology is that human beings can alter our external circumstances by altering our attitudes of mind. We'll just stop here for 2 seconds. I know we can't see each other, at least I can't see you, but I'm curious to know, does that make sense? Can you just write in the chat, does that make sense? What William James is saying is what you and I think about at any given moment changes how we feel about stuff. Yeah? Sure it does. Can't argue with that. The way we feel about things changes our actions, right? Yep. And our actions, well, that affects our outcome. So what you and I think about at any given moment has a follow-on impact on our outcome. If you're thinking about a yellow car, you're going to be able to see more yellow cars. If you're thinking about obstacles, you're going to be able to see more obstacles. If you're thinking about opportunities, you get it, right? You're going to see more opportunities. Now, Tony's right. I interviewed a whole bunch of Rotarians, some younger ones, some seasoned veterans, and some in the middle of the road, some Rotaract people, some full-on Rotary leadership. And I was trying to figure out, is this a relatively open-minded group? Like, could we try sort of non-standard trainings and non-standard presentation style? And it looks like, I'm just looking at my screen, it looks like we have 214 participants on Zoom, and we've got another, can't see the exact number, but we've got a whole bunch of people connecting in from Facebook. And that suggests to me that no matter what happens, there's always a group of people who are open-minded and willing to try new stuff. And that to me is super exciting. But there's 2 central themes that I want to follow for our short time together this morning. The first one is this idea of mindset that William James is saying, that thoughts affect feelings, feelings affect actions, and actions affect our outcome. Let's park that idea for a second. The second thing I want to share is, well, it's kind of an interesting trend that I've noticed. in the last 15 years, when you give speeches for a living, pre-COVID, you'd get on an airplane. I live in Midtown Toronto. Don't hold that against me. I'd get on an airplane from Toronto and I'd fly to Vancouver. And whether it was a charity event or a sales meeting or a large conference or whatever, meeting organizers, meeting planners would come up to me and they'd say, Chris, now just so you understand, this is Vancouver. This is a unique marketplace. We're different than Ontario. And then you leave downtown Vancouver and you hop on a float plane, you land in Victoria, and they'll pull you aside there and they'll say, you know, Chris, just so you know, this is a unique marketplace here in Victoria. The way we do things is a little bit different than Vancouver on the mainland. And then you get in a rental car, and you drive up the, I can't remember the name of that highway right now. It's not the Coquihalla. Anyway, the highway that goes from, maybe you can put it in the chat if you remember, the highway that goes from from Victoria to Nanaimo. But you hop in a rental car, you land in Nanaimo, and they'll pull you aside there and they'll say, just so you know, Chris, this is a very unique marketplace here in Nanaimo. You see a trend, right? Yeah, I think so. So you get on another set of planes and you land in Calgary, and they'll pull you aside there and they'll say, look, we just heard that you were in Vancouver and you were in BC. BC's different than Alberta, and the way we operate here in Calgary is unique. And then you go to Edmonton. It turns out Edmontonians hate Calgarians. It's a fascinating thing, but it's true. If you've ever been to Calgary and Edmonton, they don't really like each other. It's more than a hockey rivalry. So you go to Edmonton and I say, this is a unique marketplace here in Edmonton, just so you know, buddy. And then you hop on another set of planes, right? And you go to Saskatoon and Regina and Steinbeck and, I don't know, Red Deer, Alberta as well. And you bounce all the way through the Rockies and through the prairies. You hit Windsor, Ontario, and they say, Chris, this is a unique marketplace here. And you get to Port Elgin, they say, Chris, a very unique marketplace here in Port. And then you get to Southampton and say, there's a unique marketplace here in Southampton, Chris. The way we do things, it's different. Jerry's Fries is different, actually. And Jerry's fast food is freaking amazing. But then you keep bouncing through sort of southwestern Ontario, right? You get to Stratford. Chris, this is a unique marketplace we have in Stratford. Then you bounce through Brampton and the Greater Toronto area. You see the trend, right? What ends up happening is you keep moving along to Kingston's unique marketplace. Then you go over that border to La Belle Province, right? You go to Quebec. They pull you aside there in Montreal. They say, hey, Chris Daffer, notre marché ici à Montréal, c'est unique. And you look at them with your best, Mississauga, Ontario French immersion, and you're like, I've got this. Bonjour. Bibliothèque, Pamplemousse. I'm sorry, that's all I got for you. But they say, notre marché, c'est Montréal, c'est unique. And then you bounce through you keep flying through other airports, and you end up in the Maritimes, and you hit, Halifax. They say this is a unique marketplace. You hit Moncton. This is a unique marketplace. It's not like the economic engine of Halifax. It's different here in Moncton. And then you get to Newfoundland, and they pull you aside there. They say, just say no to buy a marketplace here in Newfoundland. She's unique, eh? And I was feeling playful at the time, and a gentleman puts his arm around me, and I put my arm around him, and I go, oh, I heard that before, bye. And he says, you making fun? I said, well, kind of, and he goes, come on, we're going drinking. And he sort of pulls me down and we're going drinking. Note to self, don't do that before a speech, the night before a speech. So the next morning, I had to phone my wife. I was like, oh my gosh, Sheila, I think I found one. She goes, what's that? I said, unique. Because here I am at this, I forget the name of the saloon in St. John's, Newfoundland. They pull me aside and they say, okay, Chris, now you got to be screeched in. You use an honorary Newfoundlander. And I stand on this little stage and they bring out this dead fish. Just put in the chat if you've ever experienced this or not. Like the fish. Does anybody remember what kind of fish it is? Uh-huh. It's the cod, right? You got it. A whole bunch of folks, maybe you've been screeched in too. Talk about a unique experience, my friend. So they bring out this fish, and it's a dead fish, right? And so they came, well, now you got to kiss the cod. And I was like, really? You kiss the cod? Well, okay, when in Rome, I guess I'll do what, some other people are doing. Fine, I'll blend in. So I pretend to kiss the cod. I sort of lean in. Okay, there you go. And the guy goes, no, Chris. Like you mean it, bud. I'm like, what? Yeah, you got to make contact. So I'm like, really? So I kiss this dead fish, and it's like it's quite revolting. And of course, they bring me a shooter of, and you already know what it is, right? It's Screech. They bring me a shooter of this rum. And I do this shooter, and I'm wiping this sort of dead fish stink off my lips. And I said, I have to make a phone call. I'll be right back. And I phoned my wife, I was like, hey, Sheila, yeah, I found one. What's that? Unique. Hang on, I got to go. More shots. Here Here's what happens. If every single engagement for the last 15 years, you start to hear to yourself, or you start to hear from clients, this is a totally unique marketplace. We have completely unique set of problems and unique challenges and unique people and unique business. Whatever you think might work in Manitoba is probably not going to work in Saskatoon. Whatever you think it works in Edmonton is not going to work in Red Deer. By the way, Red Deer, they love to hate Alberta, or they love to hate Edmonton and Calgary. I find that interesting. But when you hear that enough times, you start to think to yourself, I wonder if they are all really, really unique, or I wonder if there are some similarities, right? So I was trying to figure out, how could I illustrate what I've been noticing? And then I found it. It was buried in hour 4 of a 5-hour lecture by a fascinating dude named Wayne Dyer. Now, he's since passed, and he's written, gosh, I think dozens of books. One of the books that I really appreciated was called, The Power of Intention. If you want a reading list, I'll even email you one afterward. Just my email address is on the screen here, chris@chriscummins.com. But buried in this 4th hour of a 5-hour lecture, Wayne Dyer starts telling this story about the Seattle, Washington Special Olympics. Now, I've since researched it. What he describes happened, but it didn't happen at the Seattle, Washington Special Olympics. It happened at the Spokane, Washington Special Games. But this actually happened. You had 9 runners lined up at a starting line for a 100-yard dash. It's not a very long race, right? All 9 of them poised, they're ready to go at the starting line. There's a starter pistol, bang! All 9, they take off. They start running down this 100-yard dash. It's not very far at all. Packed stadium, Spokane, Washington. Except one guy. I don't know how he does this. I don't know how it happened. I haven't been able to find video of it yet. But one dude trips and falls right at the starting line. He starts rocking back and forth, and he starts crying. Now, just so we're clear, the Special Games is for participants with mental challenges, right? Whereas the Paralympics, that's for participants with physical differences. I don't even want to say physical challenges, because some runners are even faster. But this is the Special Games. We've got some mental challenges. So we've got 9 runners lined up. Gun goes off. Poof, they all take off out of the starting blocks except one guy. Trips and he falls right at the starting line. He starts rocking back and forth, and he starts crying. The other 8 runners, they're still going for it in their race, except one girl with Down syndrome. She hears the dude crying. She hears the commotion, so she stops running. She turns around. She walks back to the starting line. She bends down and kisses this guy in the cheek. Just a light peck, just a little peck. Kisses him on the cheek. She stands up really proudly. She swings her arms really high. She's like, there! That'll make it better. Isn't that cool? That's not even the cool part. In my opinion, the coolest part of the story is that none of the remaining 7 runners crossed the finish line. All of them stopped in various parts of their race. All of them turned around. They walk back to the starting line. They pick up the dude who fell. They grab the girl with Down syndrome. And organically, no one's organizing this, no one's in charge, just organically, all 9, they start linking arms. They start sort of connecting. Hey, why don't you, let's come over here. Yeah, how about, sure, let's do that. All 9 of them lock arms and they walk down this 100-yard dash. Check it out. I have goosebumps right now. Right now, both arms. All 9 of them walk down this 100-yard dash. They all cross the finish line at the same time. Now, when they hit the midpoint, the place is like, what just happened? By the time they cross the finish line, the place blows up. Now, we can talk about membership drives. We can talk about recruiting younger members. We can talk about fundraising. We can talk about having French fry events. We can talk about whether or not younger people know all of the the systems and the customs of Rotary, and we can talk about toast to the Queen, and we can talk about taking the time to network and mingle after meetings, and we can talk about how long a meeting should be, if it should be 3 hours or 1 hour or 42 minutes, or how we can talk about all of these little logistical things, and I want to get there during our time today. Before we get into any of that stuff, though, I want to bring some attention to what those runners reminded everybody in that stadium of, and now reminded you and me right now. And that's something I'm going to call the human condition. Yeah? We could call it the human experience. There's a whole mess of subsets of the human experience and the human condition. And there's all this big interconnected mess. It's really hard to be human. It's really, really challenging. Life is very difficult for most people on this planet. But one of those little interconnected pieces that I want to touch on today is this idea of the law of reciprocity. And you already know it. You wouldn't be attracted to Rotary if you weren't already probably living it. But I just want to shine a light on this law of reciprocity. It's pretty straightforward. When one human being receives value from another human being, in every level of civilized development, was first world, third world, every religion, every language, it turns out that when one human being, anywhere in the world, gets value from another human being, generally speaking, that person will feel compelled to return value at some point. Now, is it always true? No. Are there some people who are awesome at the taking part of the equation, but they're not so hot at the giving part of the equation? Yeah. Now, Harvard Business Review published this fascinating study. It was the largest sort of longitudinal study of human psychology in like forever. I think they have 4 different curators, and the study's still going on. And they interviewed first-year Harvard students, and they've followed them throughout their lives, and they're in their 70s and 80s now. So they interviewed Harvard students, and they interviewed members of the general population. And they've kept in touch. This study has been going now for whatever it is, like 80 some odd years. They were trying to figure out what correlates to success in life and what correlates to happiness. That's a pretty amazing thing to study. Right? What is it that causes happiness? How is it that by the time you get into your 80s, like what are the things that you must have done in your life in order for you to feel happy and fulfilled and for you to feel successful? Now, I'd argue money is not the only measure of success, just so we're all clear. In fact, I know people with lots of money who are very unhappy, so that's not what I want to talk about. But what Harvard Business Review discovered was, or what they published rather, was those who were the happiest and who had met with the most success in their lives, according to this study, they interviewed Harvard students, non-Harvard students, and they just followed them from 20s up to their 80s. Those who met with the most success and who were the happiest tended to be those with the most relationships around them. People with friends who like them. Family members who like them and want to hang out with them. And it turns out what correlates to having people who like you and want to hang out with you is giving value first, which is backwards from society today. Most people in society are take, mine, and we're guarding it like this. And then you encounter this group of Rotarians anywhere in the world who don't work that way. They instead are like, here, yes, let me help you. And I've pretty much everybody I've met through this organization is very happy to give value first, not expecting a darn thing in return. I think that is so cool. And our world in 2020 and moving forward needs a lot more Rotary. So these 2 central themes that I want to follow for our time together. One is this idea that the Harvard Business Review is trying to tell us with this big longitudinal study is this law of reciprocity, or more importantly, relationships. When you and I find a way to give value to another human being, generally speaking, that human being will find a way to give value back to us. Law of reciprocity. Now, is it always true? No. See, it turns out some people are awesome at the taking, but not so good at the giving. What Harvard Business Review also discovered is those who were the least happy, who were the least successful, tended to do more net taking from the environment than giving of value to the environment. Not unlike farming. I mean, you have to till the soil, you have to water the soil, you have to fertilize the soil, then you put the seeds in, and then the seeds grow. But if I'm stationary, if I stand right here and I only take from the ground and I do nothing to the ground, eventually it's barren. Everybody knows that. It's exactly the same thing in life. So where are we going with this? What I want to talk about today is this idea of mindset, yours and my mindset, that our thoughts affect our feelings affect our actions, and our actions, they affect our outcome. And this other central theme, this idea of relationships. When you and I find a way to give value to other people, expecting nothing in return, there's a chemical reward in us. It actually makes us feel good. I'm sure you've experienced it a lot. Now, there are some things that hold us back from doing those. And one of them is when we encounter enough people who are takers. So I want you to think for a second. Is there someone in your life, don't put it in the chat, this is just private for you. Is there someone in your life who's negative all the time? Think about it. They're like a fun sponge, right? Doesn't matter what good is happening, they'll find a thing that's bad about it and they'll complain about it. They'll talk about it and they'll focus on that. They could go to Disney, granted Disney is closed during COVID, but they could go to Disney pre-COVID and have a really bad time and find everything wrong with the place. That sucks and that's broken and this is no good and that lineup's too much and this is too expensive. They will look for the negative and they'll find it. You follow? Think about people who are negative all the time. Do they tend to be net takers or do they tend to be net givers? They tend to be net givers. And I read a really cool book by a guy named Tim Cork. It's called The 3 Gs. I think it's the 3 Gs of leadership, or it might just be the 3 Gs. And the 3 Gs are give, give, give. Now, it's not just talking about monetary. No. One example is Tim Cork. He coined the phrase, and I will give him all the credit. I think it's a fantastic idea. He said, take the word networking out of your vocabulary. Remove it from your vocabulary. And replace it with the word net giving. Be the only person at a networking event not trying to take something from people there. And instead, ask people what they're trying to accomplish and then help them to accomplish it. See, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in The Tipping Point. He talks about super connectors and things. And it turns out that when you give enough value to the world around you and you just place value here, 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 and you help enough people accomplish what they want to do, eventually you'll get what you want because life just rewards that. So what I want to focus on is this concept of reciprocity and this concept of relationships. The problem is life gets in the way. Life's really hard. I wish, and I don't know how to do this, maybe one day with virtual goggles or whatever we could do it, but I wish you and I could walk out into the world and just put a pair of goggles on and see what people are struggling with. I'm talking to people on this right now. I'm talking to you. You're probably going through a really, really, really hard time. I'm talking to the person that's got an ailing parent. I'm talking to the person that has an ailing child. Maybe someone's struggling with drug addiction. I'm talking to the person who's really worried about finances right now. I'm talking to the person who's freaked out that their grandchildren aren't getting the right direction in their life. I'm talking to the person who's, every person on this call, we're all going through something. And the problem is that we jump onto social media and we see everyone living the best life. We see everyone having the most incredible time. And then we look at our own life, we look back at Facebook and we look back at our own life and we're like, man, they're killing it. They clearly have no issues at all. I'm here to tell you that every single human being is going through an incredibly hard time pre-COVID. Now that COVID has showed up, this is a whole other ballgame, my friend. See, if you and I pause and treat every single person as though they're going through a really tough time, and by treat them, I mean you just give them a bit more leeway. You give them a bit more space to maybe blow up, or you don't snap back at them as quickly. You just assume that they're going through an incredibly difficult time, and you give them a bit more empathy and a bit more love. If all of us did that, this whole thing would blow up. See, we're motivated by fear and joy and fear of failure and trying to move away from pain and move toward joy. And it turns out a lot of our motivations come from chemicals in our brain, right? The neurotransmitters, we won't go on a big path on the neurotransmitter piece, but dopamine is this wonderful, rewarding drip thing. When someone posts something warm and fuzzy on Facebook and then zillions of people like it, they get a dopamine drip, which is why people are becoming addicted to social media now. Someone liked my post, oh, I feel better about things. We also have cortisol. When we're in high stress, cortisol will cause us to eat more, will cause us to gain weight because in a high stress environment, our body's preparing for the worst. And it turns out humans, we're all bathing, for the most part, in this really high stress environment, high cortisol, and we have short fuses, and we're in a state of panic a lot of the time. And in that state of panic, when we experience a bit of fear or we experience a bit of discomfort, we immediately pause and we go, I don't want that fear. That makes me uncomfortable. I definitely don't like that discomfort, that tightening of the stomach muscles. I want to move away from that. I want to get away from that. And what we end up doing is we end up pushing ourselves from discomfort back into a place of comfort. I met Jared Jones, the former CEO of Coca-Cola Bottling, probably 20 some odd years ago now. He was giving a speech about leadership. And I sat in the front row. I love going to presentations by other people, and I want to learn from everybody. And he said something that blew my mind. And so I went up to him afterward and I said, that thing you were talking about, discomfort, tell me one thing that you wish someone had told you earlier in your career that you think might be helpful. And he said, Chris, every single opportunity you get to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, do it. Because that, my friend, is the only time we ever grow. So then he says, tell me something you want to do. And this is 20 some odd years ago, right? I've been giving speeches full-time now for 15 years with my own company, Cummings Media Incorporated, and I started doing it a couple of years prior to that. So this is 20 years ago. He said, what's one thing you want to do? I said, well, I'd like to be a speaker like you, but it really freaks me out, to be honest. And he said, okay, you want to give speeches? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, tell you what, I want you to make a commitment. I said, sure, what do you need? He said, every opportunity you get to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, do it, because that's the only time we ever grow, right? I said, yes, I buy that. And he said, okay, so if someone asks you to give a speech, no matter how uncomfortable you get, no matter how panicked you are about your unpreparedness, no matter how much you can't, you don't think you can do it or you're not ready yet, I want you to say yes to it. And I was like, well, that scares the heck out of me. He said, exactly, that's when you grow. He said, okay, I can make that commitment. 3 days later, I get a phone call from a friend of mine at Western. I went to Western, I lived in Res for 4 years and met some incredible people. And while I was there, I gave a couple of presentations. And a friend of mine at Western said, hey, Chris, listen, we've had a cancellation of our speaker. And I know that you've given a couple of presentations in the past, when you were a student. Would you be able to come back and give a talk? And immediately, did I feel super relaxed or did I start to panic? I started to panic. Freak out. Like I had full-on fear, like just right up to here. And I said, gosh, I don't know if I'm ready yet. And then I hear Jared Jones in the back of my mind, right? He says, no, you have to do this and you have to go toward that stuff that makes you afraid. And so I said, okay, you know what? Yes, I can do it. How many people do you have at this thing? Do you have like 20, 30, 50, maybe even 100 people? And she said, no, we have 2,500 people. What? I get massive panic. Immediately, no, I can't do it. I'm not ready. My brain is screaming at me, don't you dare do this. And my stomach muscles tighten up. And you know that butterfly feeling? That butterflies is the blood leaving your digestive system to go into your muscles so you can run or you can kill something. Like that's the fight or flight mechanism we all know about. The blood literally leaves the digestive tract. The blood also leaves your brain because you don't need high executive functioning in order to run really fast. So we become, it turns out, stupid when we're under mad stress and panic, which is unfortunate. That skill is not really helpful in 2020. So I eventually said, you know what, I'm on this call. I said, it scares me, but yes, I can do that. She said, perfect. We had this, thank you so much. You're filling this thing great. I drove to London, Ontario. I pulled over a couple of times and almost vomited. That's how panicked I was. I drove up to campus and I went behind the large building where it was happening. They had these London transit buses pulling up and people getting out by the hundreds of these buses, hundreds of people getting off the buses going into the hall. And I pull around back of the building and I walk in the back entrance and I wish I could tell you I was making this up. I'm not making this up at all. I walk in the back door and I'm freaking out going, how can I get out of this? How can I not have to do this? And then I noticed the floor was slippery. And then I found a nice sharp corner of granite on one of the radiator thingamabobs in the back. And I thought, and I literally thought this to myself, if I slip on this floor, if I sort of slide my foot and I slip, I could bang my head and I could scrape it open just enough that there'd be enough blood that they would totally understand that I don't have to give this speech. Isn't that wild? While I'm sitting there planning, hitting my head on a marble countertop thing, I can hear them reading my introduction. And I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I don't have enough time to get hurt enough to have them notice me. I guess I have to do this now. So they read my introduction. Chris Cummins, ladies and gentlemen, lived in res with him. Nice guy, you're going to enjoy this. And I walked up onto that stage in this incredible state of panic and massive fear and just overwhelming tension. I get onto that stage and I stutter for a minute or two, and then not even a minute, like a second or two, felt like an eternity. And then I jumped into my first story, and I just sort of calmed down after that, and then I slayed it. And after I got off that stage, it felt like this shot of adrenaline went in my neck, and I was like, wow, I want to do that again. Choose fear. Choose discomfort. Choose going toward those things that make you really tense inside, because that, my friend, is when you grow. Now, I'm not talking about physical things like, your body doesn't want you to walk in front of a bus. That's a very good control mechanism. I'm talking about the psychological stuff, the things that are holding you back from picking up the phone and calling someone you don't know, the things that are holding you back from trying a new piece of technology because you're afraid of it. Do it. Because yeah, you might screw up a couple of things, but every single time you do that, you're going to get better at it. Same thing happened with my son. He's 13. I'm a very proud father of a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old, and an 8-year-old. My son read an article in the Tilsonburg News. Let's see if I can pull up this Tilsonburg News article here. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. Check this out here. My son reads this article in the Tilsonburg News about a dude who's doing 3D printing of masks. And he says to me, Daddy, I'd love to get a 3D printer. And I said, I think you should. And he goes, really? I said, yeah, I think you should totally get a 3D printer. He said, wow, that's amazing. You're going to buy me a 3D printer? I said, no, slow down. I'm not going to buy you a 3D printer. Why don't you do a GoFundMe? What's that, GoFundMe? That's when you post a thing that you want to do, and then other people, if they decide they want to help, they just do. And he wasn't quite sure about that. So in the article that I just showed you, it tells you the name of the dude that's doing the printing. His name's Jeff Jiggins, Jiggens. He's one of the hobbyists who've been working almost nonstop making protective face mask and face shield parts for using his 3D printer for COVID first-line workers and personal protective equipment. So we're reading this article, and I said, hey, look in the article here. It says where this Jeff guy works. He goes, oh, that's interesting. I said, let's jump on Google and see where this guy works. So we jump jump on Google, and sure enough, the company has a name and the company has a website. Let's click on the website and see what it says on their website. So we noticed the website, and I said, look at that. On the website, there's a phone number. And he sort of looks at me, what are you doing, Daddy? I said, I don't know, we're just looking around. We're going to poke around. He said, I don't want to do this. I said, do what? He said, whatever you're doing, I'm nervous. I said, oh, interesting. Well, look, they have a phone number. I wonder if someone answers the phone when you call it. Daddy, what are you doing? Well, let's just see what happens if you answer the phone. Let's see what happens if you call. So we phone the phone number, and this dude answers, and he says, good afternoon, ABC Company. And or just before it starts ringing, I said, Charlie, you better think of something to say, because I'm not saying anything. I'm putting it on speaker. What do I say? I said, I don't know, maybe start with your name and tell him that you saw his article. Maybe ask for the guy. So the gentleman jumps on the phone, and he says, yeah. Charlie says, is Jeff Jiggins in? Oh, yes, just a moment. It puts, and then this guy, Jeff, comes on. He says, hi, it's Jeff. And he says, how can I help you? And Charlie says, my name is Peter. Yeah, what can I do for you? Or my name is Charlie. What can I do for you? And I said, Charlie, because we're on speakerphone, I said, why don't you tell him how old you are and that you saw his article? So he said, my name is Charlie. I'm 13 years old, and I saw your article in the Tillsonburg News. And the voice on the other end of the phone completely transformed into this sort of loving voice. And he, well, what can I do for you, Charlie? And he said, well, I'm thinking about running a GoFundMe to get a 3D printer, because I'd like to print personal protective equipment for our frontline workers as well. And the guy said, how old are you? And he said, I'm 13. He said, you're going to do a GoFundMe and buy a printer? Yeah, send me your GoFundMe link, and I'd love to put it on my Facebook page. So check this out. Charlie does this GoFundMe. I thought he'd raise $100, and I'd double it to give him $200. So far, he's raised $1,590. We bought a $1,000 printer, and he's been printing protective equipment in our basement. The intention was to give this stuff away to everybody, but every time we give it to people, they don't want to take it for free. They want to donate to his GoFundMe. So what we're doing is we're taking any dollars that come into the GoFundMe, and please don't donate. We have too much already. That's not why I'm showing you this. But we're taking every dollar that people donate after they buy one of these face shields, and we're putting it into more plastic. And we've actually found more 3D printing nerds in Toronto that we're all bonding together. And Charlie's now sending the files to other people so that they can print them, to the point where Charlie's principal asked him to do a video about what he's doing. And I asked Charlie when this whole thing was happening, I said, Charlie, what do you think was the trigger? And he goes, talking to that guy. Because he hit the goal, the GoFundMe goal, within 4 or 5 hours. And he realized that he was so afraid to talk to somebody that he almost didn't do it. But instead, when I gave him a little nudge and I helped push him past that fear, he had a conversation with Jeff, and they become buddies. Then his teacher finds out what he's doing, and the principal asks him to create a video. And I want to, as we start to close this thing out, I want to show you the outcome of choosing fear and trying new things and going toward the opportunity to give value first, and watch how it plays out. See if the audio works for you. If you can't hear, just write it in the chat.
Hi, Northlee. I'm Charlie Cummins, and I'm 3D printing personal protective equipment for healthcare workers and other frontline workers during this time. I have wanted a 3D printer for so long to print my action figures and lightsabers and movie props and so on and so on. I read a Tillsonburg News article about a guy 3D printing PPE. That made me realize that there's much more demand for personal protective equipment than action figures and lightsabers. My dad then suggested for me to create a GoFundMe trying to raise funds for this 3D printer so that I could 3D print PPE. I called the guy in the article asking him for tips and tricks on how to work a 3D printer and what files he's using, and then told him about the GoFundMe. He then proceeded to put the GoFundMe on his Facebook page, which allowed all of his friends and 3D printing buddies to see it. And I had reached my goal within 6 hours. The next day, I got the biggest 3D printer I have ever seen. This guy, the Ender 5 Plus. I did that so that I could print higher volumes faster. The thing is, the printer was way over my goal. So I upped my goal and shared it with my grandparents, who then shared it with my extended family. And then within 2 to 3 days, I had reached that goal, which was absolutely mind-blowing. I didn't think it would work. After destroying a few nozzles and learning how to work Cura and this printer, we are now printing these face shields and face mask buckles to relieve the strain of a regular surgical mask on your ears, and ventilators for one of my dad's friends who is making more high-tech masks but needs these things to put on the masks. I have delivered the first batch of these things to my uncle, who is one of the co-founders of Wellbeings, which is a company that is distributing my products. Now, there's an ER doctor at St. Joseph's Hospital wearing one of my face shields. It feels so good to know that I'm helping someone help fight this virus. Hope you're staying safe, Northley. Make sure to wash your hands and stay well. Thank you.
William James said, "The greatest discovery we've made in my lifetime is that human beings can alter our external circumstances by altering our attitudes of mind." If you think this is a very, very difficult time to be a human and it's a really hard time to be alive, then you're going to look for all of the evidence of that. If you think this is a phenomenal time to be alive and there's so tremendous opportunity, you're going to see that opportunity. And what you and I want to do, my friend, is we want more people who have the guts to push themselves into an uncomfortable spot to try new things. Maybe try doing a meeting of your own over Zoom. That's not normal. Maybe try taking a 3-hour meeting down to a 45-minute meeting so that you can attract the working moms and dads who would like to get involved in Rotary but can't necessarily commit to the full length of a normal meeting. Maybe try little tiny things like engaging through this kind of presentation, my friend. My name is Chris Cummins, and I passionately believe every single one of us is 1 or 2 thoughts away and 1 or 2 relationships away from extraordinary things in our lives. We think that every one of us have to get everything together and everything's got to be perfect before we can take off. No, in fact, the opposite is true. We need to take our flawed selves who are full of fear and discomfort and push past that fear and discomfort, almost embrace it to try new things. And Rotary of 2020 and 2021 is going to look phenomenal because there's a whole lot of Charlies coming back. Thanks so much for your time today, everyone. I'm thrilled to be involved in this. I want to send it back to Tony in the studio now.
Thank you, Chris. Talk about the power of storytelling.
No kidding.
Just motivated, energized, enthused, and we've got memories from that speech. I can understand why 45 minutes was not enough. Maybe next time we'll try Chris for 3 hours and see how it goes from there. I'm sure we'll get the same number of people participating. And I would be very to not thank you for all the help you've given us in making this production. As I said, 3 months ago, we knew this could happen. We had no idea how, and you're one of the main reasons why we found out how. So thanks for that. Thanks for your presentation. Both were awesome. Reminder to our guests, if you have questions or questions looking for answers, post them in the Q&A, and Chris is happy to respond. And we are going to now transition into a look at Rotary's role in Polio Plus and the COVID-19, because just like the kids in the race, we're here to serve.
The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us how quickly a deadly infection can spread worldwide. This virus is only a handshake away, and so we have learned to live in isolation and to practice physical distancing. We have learned of and responded to immediate needs in our community. Rotary and Rotarians are helping to meet some of those immediate needs. Coping with a virus is not new to Rotary. In its continuing effort to eradicate the polio virus, Rotary has built a worldwide infrastructure with the tools, the workforce, and extensive surveillance networks that can be used to prevent the spread of COVID-19. That network is working now in places like Nigeria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, tracing contacts and testing for COVID-19. And physical assets like vehicles and computers have been deployed against COVID-19. This is the plus in Polio Plus. We need to keep this program strong and ready. Rotary is raising funds for and working with local organizations in our communities to feed and shelter the most vulnerable. As we look to the time when those parks, play areas, and other utilities Rotarians have contributed to our communities are open again, we need to continue to protect one another by following the protocols that prevent the spread of COVID-19. The Rotary vision is, together, we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. After the conference, take your plunge. Dress in your polio gear and take the plunge for polio. In your pool, in the bath, in the shower, running through the sprinkler, or plunging into the kiddies' pool. Then, post the pic or video on social media with the hashtags Plunge for Polio, DISCON6330. A generous sponsor will donate $20 for every picture posted, up to $2,000 to End Polio Now. And of course, you can donate at Rotary.org.
And don't forget to plunge for polio!
As you can see, we had great fun doing that video, and there was my flamingo of change. Polio is Rotary's flagship project, and it's just wonderful to hear that the infrastructure that has been put in place for polio is now being used extensively to fight COVID-19. But we can only do this if people donate to our cause. So we're very excited to launch the Plunge for Polio Challenge. So this afternoon, we want you all to take on the challenge because we have a great sponsor who's going to give $20 for everybody who participates. And so go ahead, jump in the lake, jump in the river, jump in the shower, pour a bucket of ice water over your head, whatever plunge means to you, and post it on social media with the hashtags Plunge for Polio and hashtag DISCON6330.